Shalom. We're in chapter 6 of Genesis. Those of you who just read it with me know that, but for anybody listening at a distance, they need to know where we are, so that's where we are. Brother Melech needed some extra time to study on his topic, and I always applaud that. I know in a lot of fellowships, if somebody comes forward and tells the minister they're not ready to do, or the head minister they're not ready to do their teaching, there's condemnation. And brother, I take it that you've felt that before or seen it happen. Yeah, that will never happen here. I promise you. If you feel that you need to study more deeply before you teach something, I applaud that, because we can never go too deep into the Word, but we can sure go too shallow. And yes, that's a flood joke. All right, dive deep, brother. Dive deep. When men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among those that pleased them. All right. Great biblical, theological conundrum, question. People who only read the English and read typically a more traditional English translation, something derived from King James, or possibly an early reformer, wrestle with this verse because they don't bother to go back and read the Hebrew. Okay? Most of the translators, quote-unquote translators today, aren't really translators. They're transliterating some other English translation or some other later translation into a form that they think will be palatable to the modern reader. And when we do that, we lose a lot. And that's why I stress, if you don't have a JPS, a Jewish Publication Society Bible, Tanakh, I encourage you to get one and study it, not because I'm trying to promote the product. I get nothing from doing that, okay? But because of all the Hebrew translations I have ever read, the one that comes the closest to being literal, it's very hard to get a literal translation of an otherwise dead dialect. The one that comes the closest to literal that I have found is the JPS. Okay, now a lot of people say, well, why don't you teach out of King James? It's what everybody has. I teach out of the JPS because I want to be as close to the original word as I can. You read the King James at home or any other translation at home, that's your business. I read other translations sometimes looking for insights or other people's thoughts. But when I want to get literal, I open up the JPS. And because I do that, I don't wrestle with this verse. A lot of people argue because the English tends to say that the sons of Elohim, or so he says the sons of God, you know, they came down and they took wives from among the daughters of men. And a lot of people read that and say, well, that means the righteous line of Seth was marrying the lines of Ham and Japheth. And they were condemned for that. And loses the fact, because there's this argument, because the people who read the Hebrew come back and say, no, they were angels. And then other people say, no, they were men. Entire church groups, entire denominations have split over this topic. But if you read the Hebrew literally, the divine beings, that's not the children of Seth, that can only mean angelic beings. The divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among them. That's pretty cut and dry. Angels stepped out of the heavenlies, came through the veil, okay, saw the beauty of women, and decided to create children with them. Yehovah said, My breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed him be 120 years. So we see a little bit of judgment coming here. People had already begun to die. Adam was dead. Seth was gone. Some of the earlier generations had passed away, but the ages of these generations were immense. And I told you last time we talked about this when I taught chapter 5 that Methuselah was the oldest man who ever lived, and I said it's important that we understand when he lived. And something I didn't talk about then because I wanted to talk about it when I was teaching this chapter. If you do the math, Adam lived this many years, had this son. He lived this many years, had this son. If you count up and you do the math and you figure out when Noah was born compared to Methuselah, and you do the math, Methuselah died in the flood. Think about that. When there is a judgment, the judgment is absolute. A lot of times we talk about judgment that has come, and people, they fairy tale it, they paint it up. They say, "Oh, we're just gonna go walk up in front of him, and we're gonna see our lives flash before our eyes, and he's gonna tell us we were good." No, that's not what judgment is. Not a person in this room, including myself, is going to be told that they were good. I pray that everyone in here is told that they were good with his help, with his indwelling spirit guiding us. But prior to that, there was nothing good about us. And everyone in this room deserves absolute judgment, just like what we're reading about here. Just like what he describes that he's going to do to his own creation. But he cuts them off at 120 years, cuts us off at 120 years. Can't live past that. And he took away even the oldest man on earth to make his judgment absolute. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth. Now the Nephilim, for those who don't know, anybody who doesn't know, a Nephilah is, I guess it's actually Nephilim, if I want to be proper about it. But a Nephilah is basically an angelic human hybrid. Father is an angel, mother is an earthly woman. The product tends to be a giant. We've actually found skeletons of these, although most people in archaeology don't want to talk about it. They have been found, they have been displayed. When the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men, who bore them offspring, they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Okay? There were giants on the earth. They're not fairy tales. Later we're going to read that it happened again. People say, "Oh, all those Greek and Roman gods and gods of other, cultures, they're just made up." I don't think so. I think what they called gods, we call fallen angels. And I think what they called great heroes, you think it's you think the story of Hercules, where he was half god and half human, is just a coincidence that he was super strong and had all these so-called near god powers? I don't believe it at all. I believe it was based on a Nephilim. Was that really his name? I don't know. Mythology is a funny thing. But I believe that there were half humans walking around on the earth at one point that had these abilities. Why? Because Scripture tells me so. Yahweh saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. Now here's another, I don't think difficult, because when I started studying Hebrew and I started looking at this, and it suddenly made sense to me. I was just doing word studies, but suddenly what is that word? Because people wrestle with it, because usually the modern translations say he repented. And people say, well, I guess God sinned. I say, that's impossible. Because even if it was wrong, if he said it was right, suddenly it becomes right because he is Elohim. And people say that he repented, because that's a word that has been passed down to us. But in 1611, when the King James was translated, repented did not mean, in the language at that time, exactly what it meant when we translated it later on. It could mean regretted. Okay? Languages change. That's why it's important to go back to the original language. Yehovah said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. Not he repented. He regretted. It's a huge difference. But Noah found favor with Yehovah. Noah found favor with Yehovah. You know what it doesn't say here? It says that he was told to take his wife and his sons' wives onto the ark. It only says that Noah found favor with our Creator. We must understand daily the responsibility that we have as parents. You two young men you're of marrying age and you're getting ready to be. We must understand the impact that we have on the next generation. Noah's sons and their wives were only saved because Noah was faithful. Think about that. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. You know, that means that no one alive could condemn him, say he was a bad man. Noah walked with Elohim. Gee, I wonder if those two things are related. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth became corrupt before Elohim. The earth was filled with lawlessness. The earth was filled with lawlessness. You know when Messiah says, depart from me, ye worker of iniquity, I never knew you? That word iniquity in Greek is anomia, and it means lawlessness. Do we see a connection here? Talk about the first judgment and the last judgment. Do we see a connection that lawlessness is a key that opens the door to judgment? When Elohim saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth. Elohim said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make it an ark with compartments and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make an opening for daylight in the ark, and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put an entrance to the ark in its side. Make it with bottom, second, and third decks. You know what I see when I read that? I see specificity. I see exactness and detail. I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, God told me this. I just got to figure out God told me to do this. I got to figure out how I'm going to do it. Nowhere in Scripture do I see someone given an order, given a commandment, the personal direction by our Creator, where it's not specific. He doesn't say build a big boat. It says build an ark this long, this wide, this tall. Put the opening here. You know why? Because Elohim had a plan, and if Noah had done it his way, it wouldn't have fit the plan. You know, not everybody gets a direct instruction from Elohim. I get that. Oh, but wait, we do. It's called Torah. It literally means instruction. We say it means commandments or the law. That's how we interpret it, but it means instruction. The things that we read in Torah are exact. There's no question marks after it. No, do not eat pork unless. Do not work on Shabbat. Well, there is actually an unless it's life-saving. But even that's specific. So I guess you could say where there is an unless, it has to be the unless is given to us in Torah. So it's still a direct instruction. It doesn't say keep the holy days on these days, unless that's not convenient. I actually had to part ways with some elders in a congregation one time, almost exclusively because they chose to do the holy days when it was convenient to their schedules and not according to the calendar that he gives us. His instructions are always specific. And the Brit Hadash says that Elohim in heaven is not the author of confusion. And so much of what I see, even among professing believers these days, is confusion. You know, when I went to work over corrections, I saw a lot of confusion among the chaplaincy. And I asked the director, can I please start a once a month, an organizational meeting and a planning meeting and do a training meeting so these people actually know what they are and are not allowed to do in a correctional setting, and so that they're safe and so that they understand how they can help people through their ministry in that setting. And she said, absolutely, we're supposed to have it, people just never have it. I cannot tell you when I announced my resignation how many of those chaplains have called me or texted me and thanked me for that change. Not because of me, but because they are now on par and on the mark in that area. They're organized. They're not stepping on each other's toes. They're not counteracting each other. They're not, there's nothing. They're not vying for who gets the room this Tuesday for a Bible study or a prayer meeting. They're organized. He gives us an order of service. That's what Siddur is. That's what Seder is. Okay? That things will be in an orderly manner. He's not the author of confusion. And there's no one less on that one. For my part, I am about to bring a flood, waters upon the earth. Now, why does he follow with that? People say, why does he repeat himself? He already said there's going to be a flood. Why does he say there's going to be waters on the earth? I'll tell you why. Because there had never been waters on the earth before. The entire earth at that time was tropical. The floodgates of heaven had never opened. Moisture came up in a mist and fog and covered the earth every morning, Scripture says, and then it descended and watered the plants. Perfection. Something we're still trying to do with modern sprinkler systems. They haven't. There had never been a flood. And so when Elohim said, I'm going to bring a flood, then he had to tell Noah what a flood was. You know why? So he'd fear it. There's not one place in the entire Bible where a judgment is executed that he has not defined and warned us about and said, if you don't do this, this will happen. There's not one. People ask me, how is it that your God, you say he's righteous, how could he destroy anybody? How could he, condemn anybody? He does it because he's righteous. Because what he says he means, he means. It goes back to the question of ethics that I brought up earlier. If a person says they believe something, like a Hippocratic oath, and then doesn't live by it, that's not righteousness. And the things that I said I wouldn't do, for the average person, wouldn't be a problem. But when you've taken an oath to not do those things, you can't go back and do those things. You can, but it's not righteous. We can apply that to our whole lives. We came into covenant, we said that he was our master. And from then on, we would strive to do his will. If we say that we're striving to do his will and we're intentionally going out and sinning, that's not righteous. I don't know how many times I've had people say, I don't believe this. I say, okay, you don't have a conviction? That's fine. That's between you and him. And later they come back and say, okay, I get it now. I believe it. It's what I'm going to do. Okay. And then a little while later in their walk, week, month, year down the road, they're back to doing the old thing. And I say, hey, you said you had a conviction on that. You're judging me. No, I'm not. When you said you didn't understand it, I left you alone. But now that you understand it, you know that it's wrong. My Bible, my Torah, my Tanakh, my Brit Hadesh all say that if I don't hold you accountable as a brother, and it works both ways, you need to hold me accountable too. But if I don't hold you accountable as a brother, your blood is on my hands. To destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. Pretty absolute. But I will establish my covenant with you. I will establish my covenant with you. You notice it doesn't say, I will establish a covenant with you. You notice it doesn't say, I will establish a covenant that you write, I will sign it. He says, I will establish my covenant with you. That means he lists the stipulations. Not us. Not Noah. You know, I know the dispensationalists hate this when I say this, but that's the same covenant we have today. Oh, no, it's changed. No, it hasn't changed. It's been clarified. Because in our feeble minds, sometimes we're too dumb to understand the simple stuff, and he has to spell it out, draw a picture, basically, for us. This is the covenant of salvation. If it wasn't, those 8 people would have died. But throughout Scripture, he says there's one covenant of salvation. If you say there's 2 or 3, or as I used to believe because I was taught it, 7 separate covenants in Scripture. If you believe, 7 separate covenants of salvation. But the same teachers would say there's only one way to him. Because they did the whole dispensational, now that doesn't exist anymore, now we're doing this. If you believe that, then Elohim is a liar to you. The Brit Hadech says that the one thing that Elohim cannot do is lie. You know why? Because if it wasn't true before he said it, and he said it, then it's true. Because it was uttered from his mouth. You shall enter the ark, and your sons, your wives, your wife and your sons' wives. And of all that lives, of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. So we see a picture here. You notice it was him, his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, in that order. We see an older man leading 3 younger men into the ark of salvation. And then we see an older woman leading 3 younger women into the ark of salvation. And we see the wife following the husband in every case. Why? Because that's the order of things that he created. That husbands should lead their families, and that young men should be led by old men, and that young women should be led by old women. And when I'm saying younger and older here, I'm not even talking necessarily age, but your maturity and faith. If you happen to have a mentor, like this guy over here in the corner, who you're blessed enough to call a friend and a brother, who is both older and has seen more of the world and more of life than any of us, and also very deep in the Word and has learned more from our Creator than any of us, cling to him, follow him into that ark. We also see a picture of perfection and plan. We see a picture of there always being a remnant. Sometimes Some of you ask me, why are we so few? There are so few Jews in this community. Ethnic Jews, they're all over the place. Everywhere. Observant Jews, not so much. Why is that? Because he said there would be a remnant. He didn't say it would be great in number. I think the number is 0.02% of the world is actually an observant Jew. There's a lot more Israelites than that. But when it comes down to people who observe the covenant, I believe the number, the last estimate was 0.02% of the world's population. There's a whole study on it about how when that number gets higher, all of a sudden it dies off again and it comes back down to 0.02%. It's an interesting study. But you know, it has never, any time recorded, fallen below that. Interesting, the two, huh? They would come by twos. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and store it away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so. Just as Elohim commanded him, so he did. Just as Elohim commanded him, not as Elohim commanded him and a few other things. You ever been in a congregation like that? We observe the Torah and these 15 other rules. Yes, we believe the entire Tanakh and the Brit Hadesh and all these extra prophecies that somebody came up with. Ever been in a congregation like that? Yes, we believe his word is perfect, but we have these bylaws that we follow. Just as Elohim commanded him, so he did. Do you realize, had he not done just as Elohim commanded him, he would have died? As would have his sons and his wife and his sons' wives. And we would not be here today. Think about that. The next time you're tempted to add to the word or to take away from it. And if you ever see me doing it, call me on it. Do we have any questions? Midrash time. Yes, brother.
It's interesting. Let's look at the Bible, Revelation, it's the same thing.
It does.
You take from or add to.
Do not.
And that's a problem I think that I have sometimes with it. I say things that I shouldn't be saying because I don't know. I think I know at the time, but I really don't. I need to keep my mouth shut, not say anything.
I think we're all guilty. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying I think we're all guilty. Guilty is the key word there.
And another thing, don't ever bite to look to me like you're being so nice. Because I am nobody. I really mean that. I am less than anyone in this room.
And because you believe that is why we can trust you to give us good guidance. I'm not saying you're perfect.
No, I'm not.
I'm not saying you're perfect. I'm not foolish. I don't believe that. But I believe I've learned a lot from you.
You see how I live?
Brother, there are people who would call that a palace. Got any questions, brother? Jacob? Back there? Somebody. Okay.